Okay guys, this is our last video for the dash points under our second critical question. So this is the final planning consideration before we actually start creating our training program for the year or whatever it is. So the last one is our climate and seasons. So on the screen is the page from your booklet, and what we need to think about is where are the events, because we've already planned for the events that we're going to participate in. So where actually are these events going to be held? And in that picture you can actually see that this continues with the theme of the tennis Grand Slams. So we have our first Grand Slam in Melbourne, which is in January. Now we know how damn hot it is in Australia, and so those athletes have to be extremely prepared, not only for the physicality of the sport, their fitness levels, etc., and their performance needs, but they also have to do some type of acclimatisation for the season, because even for us who live in Australia, it can be very taxing on our body. So think about athletes who are from a European country who are coming from a winter and coming into Australia. So they have to consider this even before when they're planning their training. So they might actually plan in that training to come to the country that they're going to play in 2 to 3 weeks prior to it. They might also play other events prior to the big Grand Slam that are being played in Australia. There is also an event in Sydney before the Melbourne Australian Open, so they might consider participating in that just to try and get their body used to the climate and season. So initial planning considerations need to think about those seasonal variations. It's important for those athletes to be prepared in terms of the attire that they bring for the training and during the competition. So we're talking clothing, and they're going to wear heavy clothing, lightweight, breathable clothes, things that might avoid getting sunburnt as well. Our next, when you think about also, so you got Melbourne and then you have Paris, and I think when it was 4 months, let's have a quick look. So we got January, February, March, April, May. So yep, 4 months. And it's not to say that they're not going to do any type of sport, but they're definitely building up to the French Open if they're going to do it. So that's in May. If we know anything about seasons, that'll be coming into their, so that'll be their summer. Okay, same with in England. Okay, so summer. And then we have in America going into their autumn as well. So we've got a very hot sport here or event. Then we've got their summer, okay, and then this autumn. So they've got to consider those climates and what seasons they're in, when they plan their training. Things like heat, wind, rain, cold, fog and humidity are also examples of climatic influences that require specific strategies. So again, when we're planning our training, we would think about what's coming up in maybe in that month before that event, and we'd start to actually think about those conditions and making sure that we're playing in those conditions, we're preparing the body, and that we're ready when we actually hit those conditions. So some of the examples say things like protective or reflective clothing, so you'd need to plan for those things. Obviously sunscreen and things like that would be something that you would actually think about prior to the event. That's not actually an initial planning consideration, but if it's an initial planning consideration, we might decide that a month out we're going to go over to Australia and we're going to play in the Sydney Classic. I think there's also another one in Queensland possibly, or we might even go to another country that's similar to Australia. We don't necessarily have to come to Australia, but we'd have to plan that in our training, and so we'd need to set that out when we do our planning year. Okay, so what considerations need to be taken into account? I think I've pretty much explored most of those. What I'd also like you to do is read briefly php.net, finish off watching the video about climate and season, and also here we have the elite and recreational amateur differences. So again, that provides you with a couple of examples. I'd like you to fill out that blank worksheet that you also received to make sure that you've got you've completed all 3 sections. So one for performance and fitness needs, scheduling of events, competition, and then this one, climate and season. And make sure you understand the differences for elite and recreational athletes. That is the critical part of the dot point or the dash points. And that's the learn to. So one other thing I'd like you to complete is in your booklets, possibly, here it is, sorry. In your booklets on the next page, it actually says, describe the specific considerations. So this is a summary. Copy the table, okay, and complete it. And it says, summarize the specific considerations for each of those type of athletes. Now, if you think you've already done it in those blank pages, then fantastic, okay, but you need to be able to understand those specifically. The other thing I would like you to do is in pdhp.net, they do have down the bottom where the video is, they have in 2015, this was the question, how does planning for performance differ for elite and amateur athletes? I'd like you to do that question and hand it in at the end of the lesson. So it needs to be done. I'd also suggest Googling other past HSC questions if you have time, and if you have time, do another one. This question outlined the initial planning consideration for individual athletes. Again, it's a very brief, it's an outline, so it's 3 sentences, no more. I'd like you to do the 8 marker, please. Okay, so I'll check all this work for Friday, and have a good day and take care.